Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
I'm always reluctant to tell this story to people because some details are too personal, but I figured an anonymous spook board would be the perfect place. Whenever I was 9, I had a friend, Natasha. Her and her mother were extremely similar in that they were both very loud and very abrasive in their tone of voice, their mannerisms, and their speech. Her father was a quiet man, but a gentle giant. He was big and bulky, looked like a thug covered in tattoos, but was a lovely man. Anyway, I was staying in her house one night, and outside of her room, in the corner of the landing, they had this big doll. It was a little smaller than me, but human-sized. It wore a yellow raincoat and rain hat and was soft, like a plushie, but could still stand on its own. The strange thing about it was that it was designed to hide its face in the corner of the wall. Its hands were stitched to its face, so it looked as though it were counting in hide and seek. The doll wasn't scary at all. It was quite pretty, but there was always a strange air about it, perhaps just human instinct. It was after I stayed at her house that something very strange started happening in my room, day and night. In the corner of my room, I could see someone standing with their face hidden in the corner just like this doll. I thought I was just imagining it, but it would appear there sporadically day or night. I knew this was extremely odd because I wasn't stupid. One night, maybe 2 weeks after its first appearance, I decided to get out of bed, stop being so afraid, and investigate. I went over to the figure and reached my hand out to touch it. Nothing was there. I didn't feel any cold. My hand just went straight to the wall as if nothing was there. However, I could still see this figure standing with its back to me. I asked it who it was and it didn't respond. I tried this same thing over and over and it never responded. One day I was out playing with my friend Natasha and we were playing outside this guy's garden. He always lived on my street and he was a very stereotypical creepy man, but we were young and naive. He always let us play in his and listen to our CDs in his car and told us not to tell our parents cause they might ground us. Do Minecraft YouTubers all go to the same class or some shit cause it's always this same line. One day he asked us if we wanted to go on a drive with him. We of course said yes, but we had to go eat our dinner first. We went into my house and my mom gave us cheesy pasta. I love cheesy pasta and it's hilarious how appropriate it is in this case. When we were eating it as quickly as we physically could, we heard a huge scream from upstairs. It sounded like my brother had really hurt himself. We sat there in silence just listening to what was happening and feeling automatically guilty as what seems to happen when you're a child. My mom brought my brother downstairs and he was still sobbing. I asked what happened and she just said that someone slammed a door on his fingers. I asked who and she said something along the lines of, "I wonder who could slam your bedroom door on his fingers. You're grounded, tell Natasha she can go home." I wasn't in my room, obviously. I was downstairs eating pasta, but parents are always right and never to be convinced. So Natasha went straight home. I, however, was upset and angry and wanted to go on this car ride, so I snuck out of the house and went across the street. I knocked on the man's door and he came out, smiled, and took me to his car. As I sat in his front seat, I looked cautiously over to my house to see if I had been caught out. I looked around all the windows and saw no one around, until I looked at my bedroom window and I swear I could see a dark shadow obstructing a small portion of the window. I thought nothing of it, and we drove off. To cut this part of the story short, I was driven to the countryside, taken out to a field and demeaned, but not life-threatening ways. I never told my parents what happened. I just told them I tried to run away. I figure they must have found out, however, because the guy seemed to mysteriously leave, and I never heard from him again. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I was given a sign. But perhaps a child doesn't exactly think straight after being alone with a trusted adult. After this point, things in the house got more and more strange. I kept seeing this figure as usual, but things started going missing. There would always appear a stench of cigarette smoke. Footsteps could be heard around the house. My parents recounted once walking into the kitchen and seeing all of the cupboard doors open like some paranormal activity shit. Eventually, they stopped blaming me and started realizing that shit was not normal, The activity always seemed to happen just before something bad. Our electricity went out for no reason and went back on for no reason for a few days. Electricians from the council couldn't figure out what was wrong. A few days after this, my uncle committed suicide. It was things like this. Skip ahead several years and I'm in my room with my friend William. We were about 12 or 13 years old at the time. William was a shitty influence, but I wasn't an idiot, so I was never influenced. Nonetheless, my parents didn't like us hanging out. I thought he was cool, though. He asked me if I wanted to do something cool with him, and I asked what, but he wouldn't tell me. All he said was to meet him round at the community center in 5 minutes. He left my room, and I sat and waited patiently for 5 minutes. As I waited, the air went cold, absolutely freezing. It was summer, but I'm in Ireland, so it's not that unusual. However, I could see my breath. It was so cold. I got up to leave after the 5 minutes were up-ish, and I heard what I can only describe as a harsh whisper right in my ear, where I could actually feel the breath hit my ear. Lord knows what it said because I immediately jumped when it happened. I sat in shock for a minute, but eventually gathered the strength to get up and go to my door. As I reached for the handle, I heard a noise behind me, like a tap or something. I turn around and it's the figure that looks like one of those dolls. I decide again to go over and ask what it wanted, but as I walked over, I started seeing like twinkles in my eyes. My mouth went numb and I suppose I hit the floor like a sack of shit. I come through in my room, still cold, and hear sirens and shouting everywhere. Eventually, I gathered enough gusto to get up and look outside to see what had happened. The whole community center was up in flames. William, who was fond of setting shit on fire and breaking into places, etc., must have done this. That was my first thought, and I froze with panic. I felt automatically guilty, but not because I thought I did anything, but just cause it seems that children are taught to feel automatically guilty. A week went by, and yes, William and his friend Gary had both died. They burnt to a stupid crisp at the age of 12 and 13. I went to their funeral, and it was the most awkward thing I had ever attended. After this, we moved out of the house. I suppose being surrounded by Chris Chans and arsonists was not our thing. Our new house has turned out to be very quiet. It's been like 5 or 6 years since that all happened. I'm 18 at this moment. The reason I tell this story, however, is because me and a group of friends were fooling around with a Ouija board one night out in the street. While we were playing, we were just messing about and spelling out shit like sniff. I don't know, but my friend Jean asked us to try and be serious for a moment. We tried to play it as seriously as possible. We asked if anyone was there. There wasn't a reaction for about 40 seconds. Then the Pringles lid, we didn't have a plancher, moved slightly. We all jumped back in reaction and looked at each other for guilt. As we looked at each other, it was obvious that we all thought someone else had moved it. Our expressions on our faces, however, told us that we would all ask the same question, and that sort of answered it. Jean put her fingers back on the lid and the rest of us followed. She asked again if anyone was there, and after a few seconds it moved to yes very slowly. Everyone looked at each other to see who would ask the questions. I asked, "What is your name?" It very slowly over the course of maybe 2 minutes spelt out none. I kinda wanted to laugh because of the level of sarcasm, but I thought best not to. I then asked if it knew anyone here. It spelt out you. I saw this as an opportunity to maybe find out what that strange doll spirit was. I asked it if it was the kid I saw in my bedroom corner. My friends looked at me like, what the fuck? It spelt out yes. Part of me wished it would just go to yes because it took its time spelling, but hey. I asked it if it was trying to protect me and my family, and it answered yes. Afterwards, I asked if it could show itself to me again. It answered yes. We tried asking things afterwards but never got a reply, so we said goodbye and left it. That night, I got into bed and slept as normal. I then wake up in the early hours for no real reason. As I turned around on my other side in the corner of the room, there it was. There it was all over again. I still see it from time to time, and honestly, I've grown to find comfort in its presence. It isn't malicious, I could always tell. It still never responds, just stands there. I try to take pictures, but it always just looks like a speck of dust in the exact same position, which isn't really conclusive evidence. To this day, I still see it but have never found out what it was. Here's one of the pics. The shadow is much larger than the ukulele and PSP case. I know it's not them, they've been there for nearly 6 years.
It is a little disturbing and weird. In Hokkaido, Japan, there is supposed to be what is called a Okiku-chan doll that has been in the Manin Temple since 1938, when its owner died. The weird and creepy thing about it is that its hair grows and is cut annually in a special ceremony. The hair has been analyzed, and they say it is in fact human hair. I tried to see if I could find out more about this, but all I could find was that the Okiku is a Japanese ghost, and the legend behind it, which goes as follows. Okiku works as a maid at the home of the samurai Tessan Aoyama. One day, while cleaning a collection of 10 precious ceramic plates, which is a family treasure, she accidentally breaks one of them. The outraged Aoyama kills her and throws the corpse into an old well. Every night afterwards, Okiku's ghost rises from the well, slowly counts out 9 plates, and then breaks into heart-rending sobs over and over and over again, tormenting the samurai. Finally, vengeance is wrought when Aoyama goes insane. So I don't know if I can find out anything else, but I would love to know more about the doll, so if anyone can help me, please let me know. Thanks.
The whole story. A mysterious doll possessed by the spirit of a child has captured the curiosity of people across Japan for decades. The legendary Okiku doll, named after the girl who long ago used to play with it, is a 40-centimeter, 16 inches tall, kimono-clad figure with beady black eyes and hair that grows. The Okiku doll has resided at the Monenji Temple in the town of Iwamizawa, Hokkaido Prefecture, since 1938. According to the temple, the traditional doll initially had short cropped hair, but over time it has grown to about 25 centimeters, 10 inches long, down to the doll's knees. Although the hair is periodically trimmed, it reportedly keeps growing back. It is said that the doll was originally purchased in 1918 by a 17-year-old boy named Aikichi Suzuki while visiting Sapporo for a marine exhibition. He bought the doll on Tanuki Koji, Sapporo's famous shopping street, as a souvenir for his 2-year-old sister, Okiku. The young girl loved the doll and played with it every day, but the following year she died suddenly of a cold. The family placed the doll in the household altar and prayed to it every day in memory of Okiku. Sometime later, they noticed the hair had started to grow. This was seen as a sign that the girl's restless spirit had taken refuge in the doll. In 1938, the Suzuki family moved to Sakhalin, and they placed the doll in the care of Monenji Temple, where it has remained ever since. Nobody has ever been able to fully explain why the doll's hair continues to grow. However, one scientific examination of the doll supposedly concluded that the hair is indeed that of a young child.
Okay guys, so something really weird has been happening with my cousin, and I guess me, in the last few months. I'd like to stress that a lot of the circumstances, though a little strange, could still be explained, I'm sure. My cousin, her family, and I have been under a lot of stress. Maybe something like this has even happened before. I don't know. We both live in an exceedingly rural area of northern New York State. She lives a little north of me in a village called Talbot Falls. Talbot Falls isn't really a place you go to on purpose. It's one of those groups of houses that may or may not have a fire hall, or a community center, or a library. People say if you blink, you'll have already passed through it. The most remarkable things are the 45-mile-per-hour speed zones that seem to stretch on endlessly for no purpose. Just a handful of renovated farmhouses and falling down barns. So, in a way, it's not really where you'd expect to meet your nightmares incarnate, which is kind of what has been happening. The cousin of mine who lives out in Talbot Falls, probably a 20-minute drive from where I live, has been a close friend of mine since childhood. We basically treat each other as sisters. I call her kids my niece and nephew, and visit them probably every day. At the time the incident started happening, probably early May, my cousin had just given birth to her newborn daughter. This meant I spent a lot of time with her older child, Cameron. To give you some perspective, Cam's pretty serious and smarter than a lot of adults in the area. His greatest interest this summer has been dinosaurs, so there's been a lot of digging in his mom and dad's back lawn. But in a way, I guess it was his interest in finding bones from days of pig roasts past in the backyard was kind of how this whole thing got started. It was really strange because I remember it being a pretty hot day. The weather had been pretty cool when it happened. I was chilling on the patio, keeping an eye on Cam, who decided to play in the playset that morning, and he came up to me carrying the most adorable plush rabbit I had ever seen. It was dressed in a little pinafore over a dress patterned with strawberries and hat of the same material, and, shockingly enough, it was completely clean. To be clear, he'd never really been out of my sight. The backyard borders on some woods that abut other people's yards, though, and I was worried he'd somehow managed to escape my watch and take something from another kid. It definitely wasn't something that his parents would have gotten him, since he was strictly interested in dinosaurs at the moment. But Cam has never been a kid who would take something from another child. So I was a little more puzzled than alarmed when I saw him trotting up to me, carrying the rabbit, which was nearly the size of himself. I think I said something to the effect of, "Hey buddy, that's a real pretty doll. Where'd you get it?" "The doll lady," he says. "She's a friend of my mommy's and she gave this to me to take care of for her." Nope. This sent off warning alarms in my head, but I forced myself not to panic right away, since small children have a vague way of explaining things anyway. So I put on a smile and asked him where he met her, since I hadn't seen her. He points back to the playset and says, "She waits for me in the Tower Castle." For those who have never seen an American-style playset, it usually comes equipped with a wooden tower you can climb up and a slide you can go down. At the top, there's a little alcove you can hide and play in. And it would have been really easy not to see someone hiding out of sight, waiting to play with Cam. Nope. Not letting Cam know I was freaking out to my very core, I told him it's snack time and got him inside quickly. Once I had gotten him sitting down and watching Adventure Time, I called his dad, Corey, not wanting to tell my cousin Katie just yet. As Corey's cell rang, I quickly went through the rest of the rooms. Since it's a single-story ranch-style house, there aren't too many places a person could hide. It seemed undisturbed and unoccupied, though I had spent most of the morning outdoors with Cam, and it would have been impossible to tell. As I peeked back into the living room to check on Cam, still happily nomming on banana bread and watching cartoons, Corey picks up. Trying not to let my voice shake, or God forbid start crying, I give him the rundown of the situation. The fact I hadn't seen anyone with Cam, or anyone at all besides the two of us, freaked me out even more. The thought that someone might still be there was even worse. But the description I give Corey doesn't ring any bells. Apparently, Katie knows literally no one in the area. Corey, who's a state trooper, knows enough about the area to be concerned, and tells me he's coming out to stop by and that I should lock up in the meanwhile. Maybe he was listening, or maybe I was freaking out enough for Cam to catch on, but as I'm locking the front door, he says, "If you're worried about the doll lady, you don't have to be. She already lives here. She's downstairs." At Cam's last statement, the only thing I could think of was, fuck. I had not even thought about checking the basement. Have you ever been so afraid you feel your whole body go cold? Yep, that's what happened to me then, while I asked if the lady was in the basement right then, and kept my eye on the door the whole time he responded. Probably. She likes to take a rest during the day. She only comes out to play if I'm playing. Cue internal screaming forever. "Okay, bud," I said in a forced casualness. "Well, I'm just going to check up on her then, see if she's doing all right." I had expected him to fess up at this point, admit that he'd found the rabbit somehow else, and he'd just been making up the whole thing. Instead, he just kind of frowns at me. "Maybe you shouldn't? She doesn't like it if you bother her while she's resting. She gets angry." I was less and less certain of anything at this point, so I just kind of jokingly sing, "Okay, Cam, I'm just going to go now." But Cam didn't say anything in response, just kept silently watching me as I approached the basement door. So at this point, I'm 80% certain this is an imaginary friend, or some crazy hobo lady squatting in my cousin's basement. I grabbed the handle to the basement door and threw it open. The windows to the basement are pretty spacious, and even without turning on the light, it's pretty easy to see what's down there. And so far, all I saw was the washing and drying machines, humming and whirring away, an empty laundry basket sitting atop the folding table nearby. But as I went down the wooden steps, I became aware of another sound which had my chest tightening in fear, making me scramble down the rest of the way. It had been the sound of something dragging a plastic bag, then falling heavily, just beneath the stairs. I couldn't turn around soon enough. Each extra move I had to make before I could face the imminent danger seemed to take eons, and when I did, a long, loud stream of terrified expletives, super not proud of that, by the way, exited my mouth as I set eyes on what had made the sound. It was a small woman. She was slumped on the ground against a set of metal shelves. Her head was down and turned to the side, and her legs were kind of folded but at awkward angles, like her knees had buckled from fear. A plastic bag, half full of mangled baby toys, which had been on the shelf presumably before she had fallen, rested partially on her head and partially on her shoulder. Not 100% sure what I said at this point. Probably something stupid and along the lines of, "Who the hell are you and what did you do to my nephew?" Blah, 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 hysterical screaming. Well, my shouting didn't really seem to get her attention, but it did get Corey's, who'd just come into the house and practically jumped down the stairs. Just to illustrate how genuine my fear was and how real Corey's response to me was, he had even carried his service piece in with him, hand on the butt, before he circled around in front of me and saw what I was looking at. For probably a few minutes, Corey did nothing but stand there. I could see his pulse jumping in his neck, and I could hear him trying to control his breathing. And then, his posture relaxed. His hand came away from his belt, and he turned to regard me. "Jesus Christ, I hate that fucking thing," he muttered. It took a long time for him to explain to me that the woman I was looking at wasn't a woman at all. She was a doll, a life-size, incredibly lifelike doll. Yep, folks, that's right. A doll. Can you tell she's fake? I couldn't when I saw her for the first time. Maybe I'm just bad at recognizing living humans, but I was certain she was a real unconscious woman when I saw her. Apparently Katie's grandfather, who was a doll maker of some renown quite some time ago, had devoted the last few years of his life creating her. She had been delivered to Katie after his passing, with a letter asking Katie to take care of Dolores. Dolores was still sitting, slumped against the shelves. As we watched, the momentum which must have carried her to the floor caused her to fall the rest of the way down, so she was resting placidly on her side. Let me reiterate, there was nothing about her which was doll-like, except perhaps her stillness. The fluidity of her body, the natural motion of her arms and legs all bespoke bones, joints, muscle, and flesh. Looking at her sent my skin into goosebumps with the sense of wrongness. Seeing how terrified I was of her, Corey laughs, reaches down and hauls the thing up by her armpits, setting her heavily back onto the shelf. Though being heavier than a dead preacher, Corey assures me you can tell she isn't real and tells me to touch her. Yeah, that's the very last thing I want to do. But he goes on to explain how her hair is real hair. Yes, I know, but her skin is just hyper-realistic silicone. Despite being made from the bones out, if you touch her, you can tell she isn't real. It takes about 20 minutes to convince me to touch Dolores, and when I do, a shudder goes through me, like if you accidentally put your hand on a live rat. I had grabbed her hand, and when I did, I could immediately feel the bones in her hand grinding from the pressure I was putting on her. Looking at her, I could feel the sensation of unreality slipping over me. I swear I could see her breath moving her hair, though at the time I told myself it was just the dryer vent, or even Corey's breath. When I let go, Corey gently explains she was created because Katie's mom had suffered a stillbirth. Apparently, Katie was meant to be a twin, and this was what Dolores would have looked like if she had grown up.
Speaking of haunted dolls, Jelangkung. The mystery behind the game of Jelangkung. For those of us living in Indonesia, where the veil of the occult still feels quite tangible, the term Jelangkung likely rings a bell. Many of us even played it back in our school days, using stationery to pose questions or try to predict the future. But despite its familiarity, what exactly is Jelangkung? Jelangkung is a traditional game steeped in the supernatural, where players attempt to call or invite spirits or ghosts to inhabit a wooden doll. It's a game passed down through generations, and stranger though was the fact that it was incredibly popular in earlier times, likely due to its perceived connection to spiritual powers. Typically, the game involves 3 to 4 people: those who hold or carry the Jelangkung doll, the one who casts the spell or incantation, and those who prepare the writing materials. This game is most often played in places considered haunted and at night, usually starting around 10 p.m. or later. The Jelangkung game carries significant risks for those who don't understand its nature and the supernatural forces involved. Often, individuals who play this game can be negatively affected. They might become possessed by the spirits summoned through Jelangkung, entering a trance-like state, or even be terrorized by these ghosts. Therefore, we strongly advise those who are merely curious about dabbling in this game and potentially engaging with the unseen world to reconsider. It poses a genuine danger to oneself. I've intentionally left some parts of the Javanese summoning chant incomplete, respecting the potential for ancient spells to backfire. This is just a little extra mystical insight for you and your friends. As an example of a Javanese Jelangkung summoning chant, consider the following: Hong Ilaheng, He Universe Alusan Spirit Haunts, Jelangkung Jalengsat Siro, Kenaning Ono, Siro Angslupo, Yen Siro Jugwenehono Tondo, Hayo Engalo Pot, Behold Endang Angslupo. Jelangkung is believed to be a magical entity capable of answering any questions posed by the players. Its exact appearance, origin, and nature remain uncertain. However, the summoning words or spell indicate that any demons or ghosts who happen to be passing by are invited to participate in the game and are expected to answer the questions raised by the players. Personally, I recall playing a simplified version using stationery to ask questions or predict things. This game seems to be gaining popularity in certain regions, particularly on the island of Java. Historically, it was often played in villages using scarecrows as vessels to call upon spirits, allowing them to enter the effigy. Typically, the game is played in a group under the light of a full moon. When a spirit arrives, it will identify itself and communicate using the stationery provided. The questions asked can be quite varied, ranging from the spirit's name, the year of its death, and the cause of its demise. It's also often used to try and predict future events, though the accuracy of these predictions is certainly questionable. The setup for the game is relatively simple when using stationery. A circle is drawn, complete with the letters of the alphabet illustrated within it. Accompanied by a simple song, which might serve as the caller's mantra, this creates the conditions believed necessary for Jelangkung to manifest in their presence. Once Jelangkung arrives, the players can ask whatever they wish, and it will respond by manipulating the tools they've provided. However, it's crucial to remember that this is not a harmless game and should not be undertaken lightly. Sometimes Jelangkung may make demands, such as wanting to be taken back to a specific place. Failure to comply can anger Jelangkung and potentially lead to problems for those who summoned it. The Jelangkung game essentially involves attempting to summon supernatural entities to inhabit dolls or puppet-like objects. Once the spirit has entered, players will usually ask the questions they seek answers to, particularly those concerning the future.
Although the station was itself predominantly empty at this time of night, Lieutenant Joseph Leary of New York's Boys in Blue had locked finally himself away in evidence storage when he listened to that tape for the first time. The tape in question, the type used in a small, outdated personal voice recorder, also in lockup, was once known as Piece of Evidence Hash 7389002 of the Fermonkov case, before issues with the chain of custody had it officially thrown out, but had been on Leary's desk for almost a month now. Frankly, if the paperwork hadn't caused the tape to be thrown out, its contents would have, according to the other officers, but the idea of the recording had made Leary put it off every chance he got. What was on the tape could only be logically explained as the last vestiges of a drug-infused mind coming apart at the seams by any sane, church-going Irish Catholic man like Leary was supposed to be. The voice on #7389002 belonged to a known drug addict, petty career criminal, occasional police informant, and general lowlife, Ivan Femonkov. Leary shuddered to himself, only in part because Ivan and he had been classmates and friends growing up, but as he liked to pretend, it was more to do with the cold Brighton Beach winter wind that seemed to perpetually invade the subterranean evidence locker. Regardless of the tape being thrown out, there was more than enough left behind Ivan at the scene to guess what happened in all its gruesome detail. Leary organized the other pieces of evidence he had checked out of storage, namely 5 badly worn layers of a handcrafted Matryoshka doll that had been mislabeled the Babushka Doll. But knowing the history of the doll, maybe that misnomer did fit better, he thought. Leary couldn't help but remember that Ivan lived with his grandparents at what would become the crime scene during most of his life, and ultimately only with his grandmother, the Nana Femonkov, at the time the recording was made in mid-November. Nana and Papa Femonkov were very old-world types, Russian immigrants who sold everything they had to come to the United States during the late 60s to start a new life after the mess with Ivan's parents happened back in Moscow. Papa Femonkov, who had attended school, spoke broken English. His wife, a country woman, spoke none. The former did his best to control the increasingly truant Ivan, but that proved another feat his wife could not manage. In the end, it was too much for anyone to control, and Papa died of a coronary back in '73. Leary was always fond of the big-hearted Papa, but truthfully, his opinionated was more mixed of the strange old woman. He had met Nana many times when visiting the house, and although they could not exchange words, there was unspoken pride in the old woman's features and her crafts that bemoaned her age and knowledge, most notably a special Russian nesting doll made to look like Ivan, the same that sat in blood-stained pieces front of Leary in 5 evidence bags at the moment. The mislabeling came from a misconception about the dolls, which were traditionally made by skilled country folk, most frequently the wise women for the past century, as a treasured keepsake passed down through generations as a sort of magical heirloom. That's why the doll got the moniker Babushka, Russian for grandmother. Sick of his childhood nostalgia that was beginning to wash over him as yet another excuse not to play the tape, Leary stirred his coffee and pressed play on the recording. He was greeted with the ghost of Ivan's voice in what seemed the middle of a one-sided phantasmal conversation. "I had to. It's too cold to go without since the power got cut, and I can't fucking deal right now without it." The sound of Ivan slumping into a heavy wooden chair and setting the recorder down on the table can be heard, but almost audibly fidgeting. His next few words are accompanied by the sound of a tinkling bell. "I'm flat broke again, and the old woman hasn't stirred. I'll take her a blanket, or she may freeze to death come morning." He goes up the stairs calmly enough, but comes storming down them, his voice noticeably different, but deadpan. "She's dead." Chuckling, he continues, "I guess the cold got to her before I did. I'm building a fire." It sounds like his high is waning, and he is beginning to crave another hit, but the sounds of crackling wood are now present in the background. He slumps back into the chair harder this time, probably too numb from cold and his latest substance of choice to have fine motor condition. "So here goes nothing, I guess. I killed the old lady when I used this month's check to buy more instead of paying the power bill like she asked, but it might be better this way. She never deserved the fuck up I am. Nobody did." A light scratching sound, accompanied by gentle steps and more tinkling, are heard across the table, most likely the family pet, a long-hair white feline named Tinkles, who has a bell on his collar, as Ivan drags over the Matryoshka dolls to where he sits. "You know, she made this for me when I was little, said she'd add a layer every time I had an achievement." Lifting and allowing the first doll's case to drop repeatedly. "It only has 5, but the old woman always loved me. As a kid, she used to tell me that if I were good, I would find something in the center." Excited now, he exclaims, "Fuck! She may have hidden some money there." But there is an odd pause. "I'll get to that. There's a reason I'm doing this, but I can't for the life of me remember it. Memory is a funny thing like that, I guess. Just holding this thing brings back some twisted thoughts." He goes back to audibly fidgeting with the doll's outer layers, and Leary knows he is reminiscing and regretting his past. Leary picked up the outermost doll and glanced upon it for the first real time. This being the newest layer, he had not seen it back in the day, unlike the others, but the shell was painted to look like Ivan had been in the last few years, worn and older than his actual age by a good decade. He was sporting the black leather jacket, bald hairstyle, and deep blue tattoos on his neck and hands that had been his calling card on the streets the past few years. The doll carried a vacant expression and blank eyes that masterfully mirrored the one that adorned the man himself in the most recent years. Leary couldn't help but think Nana Fomonkov was always exceptionally talented when he saw her work, but as he put the doll down and Ivan, almost taking a perfect cue, began again. She made this outer level when I got the job at the car dealership. She thought I was turning my act around. Laughingly, I almost believed it myself until I started helping them pack the drugs into the automobile frames to transport them into Canada. Another pause. Ivan's drugs had begun to wear off in earnest, so he would become increasingly laconically sober without spilling the beans, but he took this pause to take another long hit, as evidenced by the syringe and baggies that were found littering the area around the desk where the recorder had been found the following morning. It seems that his momentary coma was interrupted by tinkles, because this portion of the audio plays with several meows and an audible, drawn-out, salacious purr. Talking hurriedly and with increasing paranoia, Ivan began again. "I don't have a lot of time left and I need to talk. This recording is for Lieutenant Joseph Leary, my friend. Probably the only one anymore. Firstly, congratulations on becoming a father. Again. Leary's wife had given birth for the third time the night this recording was made, but due to complications, Leary was cooped up in the hospital during the first few days of the crime scene investigation and ultimately left out of the loop until now. Secondly, I have to confess a lot, and some of it is going to sound crazy. I know you were never a priest or anything, but you had a better relationship with the big man than I did. I'm going to die in the next few hours because I tried to kill her." Now sobbing. "The old lady and I got into a big argument. She knew I was using again and had blown the heating bill on some smack. Well, she started yelling and tried smacking me around, and I just couldn't stand it. So I left for a while, and now she's gone and something else is here." Suddenly changing course of thought again, he says, "She made these dolls special for me by hand when I was a kid and really put herself into them. She even put a special message for me inside of them. See? This first one says, it's muffled, probably her idea of me when she made this. Her English was never good. I never saw them all. I guess tonight is the night, huh?" Leary turned the doll on its side to find the word forfeit was burned inside the doll's shell in uneven characters that went against the style and quality of Nana's other work, but he made a note of this and began to handle the second outermost doll, a younger Ivan, one who still had hair but was already wearing his trademark leather jacket and sporting his tattoos, but unlike the previous one, he was holding a box of chocolates and flowers. It had the word "your" burned into it in the same uneven, ugly hand that seemed to stick out so badly. This one was made during Jenny, Leary remembered. The old woman made this one when I was paling around with Jenny, hoping I'd marry her all proper-like. Remember her? We still hung out then. That was before you busted me the second time. I was mostly clean. Hell, I loved that girl. I loved her good and long too." His voice dropped. "Probably still do. Too bad I killed her too." The sobbing and respective kitty affection began again full force, but this time it was combined with a rankled cough, like his lungs were rattling in his chest, the sign of a lifelong smoker. "The baby, our baby, Susie, she died too. I just couldn't stop using. And one day..." Leary already knew what happened. It was the last time he saw Ivan as a friend. The newborn baby had found a baggie of smack her father carelessly dropped, which she put it in her mouth while he was shooting up, and she choked to death. When Jenny came home, she couldn't believe it, and herself, a user, did the only thing she understood. She took the baggie from her daughter's lips and shot it. All of it. She was better at being clean than Ivan, so that was all it took. When he sobered up enough, he found his girlfriend and baby both dead in pools of Jenny's vomit and his piss. "This doll says," muffled again, although this time with substantially more static. "Maybe she added it after the fact to make it mean something. I wouldn't put it past her now, but at the end, man, she was becoming more and more sick in the head. Leary began to fiddle with the third doll. This one inscribed life on the inside and showed Ivan as a teenager in high school right around the time that Papa Femonkov passed. Ivan proceeded to go on with his rant. The next doll is before Jenny, back when we were close. Remember that? This one must have been around when Papa died. Ivan apparently found something hilarious at this point because he breaks out laughing uproariously. Did I ever tell you I killed him too? I did. I wasn't on smack then. Just some pot and painkillers and his heart medications I had been stealing and replacing with sugar pills. He caught me one day and gave me a stern talking to. I still remember that day because this stupid doll was there. He said every man like Matryoshka, Ivan, made up of his past selves. If you are not careful, to be a good man, you will risk finding your doll empty inside. And do you know who is empty inside? That question always stayed with me. He gave his leather jacket, the one I still wear today, that day. He died the week after that from heart problems. Have you figured out the answer to it yet, Joseph? I did. It's why I'm making this for you. Pushing his chair back, Ivan announces, I'm going to check on Nana, but I'll be back. In his drug-induced stupor, he must have already forgotten his previous assertions, although in all likelihood his initial assessment was flawed as evidenced by the next part. Perhaps the most gruesome, save for the finale, of course, Leary mused. Ivan's heavy bootsteps can be heard going up the stairs and above the living room of the residence, but disappear shortly, only to resurge rushedly, hurrying down the stairs, where he grabs a fireplace poker and proceeds to hit his grandmother in the head and face repeatedly as she ran down the stairs, as evidenced by the forensics after the fact, an almost painful thumping sound that her body made when it hit the floor. The audio in this portion shows a lot of screaming and some sounds that cannot be easily explained. Ivan slumped back into the chair, his breathing raked with obvious pain and great difficulty, such that his voice is barely a whisper when he says, Leary, did you know that Papa died because he wasn't taking his medicine and I was? Well, I didn't know until recently that heart and lung problems run in my family. I'm dying, Leary. The big C. Turns out drugs are bad. Who would have guessed? The news shocked Leary. Ivan was a young guy and should have a lot ahead of him in life, obviously having made some form of peace with the idea of death. Ivan continued, enough on this doll already. He grabbed the top and threw it against the wall, causing some damage to it, but nothing major. Only 2 to go, and then all of this is over. The fourth doll was Ivan as a child. This was another of the dolls Leary had seen firsthand on many of his visits to the Femonkov household. Nana Femonkov made it to commemorate Ivan completing 3rd grade in the United States and him speaking English. While one her proudest moments, this doll must have brought back some painful memories of his parents, who were both brutally assaulted and killed by thugs in Moscow while they tried to protect Ivan. He always claimed that this was his earliest and most vivid memory, yet perhaps the traumas of life have caused him to change some of the details because he began to say, this doll was probably Nana's favorite. It was for when I finished 3rd grade. It was when we met Leary. You remember? I still can't forgive you for arresting me, but I always knew it was nothing personal. This is just painful, but like every other doll so far, even at this stage I was not innocent. I am responsible for the death of my parents. I was young and selfish, and I wanted to get candy, and my parents tried to indulge me, and we got attacked by something. He made a long and painful pause and continued. The thing seemed to be more a bundle of rags than a man, but it killed my parents and tried to cut away their skin. Blood was everywhere. I wanted to die, but for some reason it ran off and left me alone with the corpses. I thought it was gone for good until I saw it again last week. This doll, the child Ivan, simply bore the word 2 as Leary slowly came to the sick realization of what was happening as the words connected in his mind. He heard a subtle crash, followed by a harsh crunch, but the tape played on. I know what is inside the final doll, and it isn't money. I remember now, all of it. All the parts I blocked out and wanted to forget with drugs and women and money. I finally figured out what is inside of an empty person, or what can be. Leary, Pistol in hand, slowly explores the area near the review room, keeping the recording in earshot as he approaches the source of the noise. Did I ever tell you about the Kisteka? It's an old Russian fairy tale about how these dolls were first made by animated skeletons. The original grandmothers who made these were witches, if you could believe it, and they learned that they did not need to die if they removed their own flesh and took the skin of another blood relative whose sins outweighed their goodness and had made themselves empty inside as a result. My grandmother, if she ever really was that in the first place, I don't honestly know anymore, is a Kisteka, and she must have attacked my parents trying to claim their skin, but instead taking control of me afterwards so she could take mine. A guttural growl screams from the small recorder speaker just as a nearly identical sound comes from the remains of the collapsed window in evidence storage. There stood a blood-covered and akimbo Ivan Fomonkov in the flesh, or at least something in his flesh. The Ivan of the recording must have opened the final baby-like doll. This one bared the epitaph "me" burned into the exterior woodwork because he uttered the answer to what an empty person has inside is only a skeleton. You want me to forfeit my life to you, grandmother, but I have more in me than just bones. I have tumors too. An inhumane scream is heard from Ivan, and the tape mercifully cuts to silence. The responding officers at the crime scene that day believed that Ivan Fomonkov murdered and skinned his grandmother, and one other, as of yet unidentified male individual, taking the skeleton of the former and the skin of the latter with him, while he avoided the police. Few men on the force would have believed that the old woman's bones wore the young man's skin like a suit and was walking around. The creature that the cameras observed the night of the break-in to evidence storage looked like, and for all intents and purposes was, Ivan Fomonkov, but what now stood in front of Lieutenant Joseph Leary, dripping dark, bloody, rotting pus from its wrists and throat and corners of its eyes, was not his friend, if it had ever been human. The Kisteka ignored Leary's warnings and subsequently his bullets without much pause as it searched for what it came for, the key to its immortality and securing another body, the Matryoshka doll it had crafted. In its centenarian hands, the doll would be remade into that of a more suitable vessel with time, and another descendant child would be obtained in Russia and raised until this flesh gave way to the disease consuming it from the inside. Lieutenant Joseph Leary did not survive the confrontation with what is officially being recognized as Ivan Fomonkov, who crushed Leary's skull with the doll and escaped the facility with them and the original tape in his possession. Police in New York State are on the lookout for this cop-killing drug addict, dead or alive, even though unofficially his body, identified by his teeth and subsequently his DNA, lies in a meat locker in downtown Brighton Beach. But that would just be crazy. Who believes in skin-stealing skeletons?
So this story begins with me helping my grandmother by painting her house, due to the fact that this lady on a ladder would, at best, result in a broken hip, and at worst, a broken neck. I suppose she could have hired some professional painters, but she happened to live in the middle of nowhere, the Dalles, Oregon. And our family has this annoying habit of staying poor, so hiring laborers would be too costly. Some more context. My whole family on my mother's side are Jehovah's Witnesses, or Jehobos, as I like to call them. I'm guessing this happened sometime after the family crossed the Atlantic. This has led to them becoming very strange, but nothing that would warrant serious intervention. For example, they are firm believers in the paranormal, and that invoking God's name can thwart off threats. All in all, after studying my family history, I decided this was a major improvement from our semi-nomadic gypsy past, which had a tendency to give me the shivers, thinking about the strange things that our ancestors did. Pick semi-related. It's the kind of stuff you'd see in the Dalles. I arrived at my grandmother's house on a small lot of land in the middle of nowhere. A few houses within eyesight, but the place is isolated. The only noise you heard aside from the noise you made was the neighbor's rooster in the morning. As soon as I get in the door, she tries to sell me on this month's issue of The Watchtower, a church-issued magazine. Yeah, okay, Grandma, so what parts of the house am I painting? She had just moved into this new house, so she gave me a tour. The first thing I noticed was how basic it was. She wasn't at risk of freezing, but there were patches with no insulation. Instead of paint on many of the walls, there was this ancient, cheap wallpaper that was fading. The whole place gave me this run-down and cheap feel. One bit that weirded me out was how strangely the house was planned out, or how little of it was actually planned out. There were seemingly random doorways and chambers, which was a little unnerving considering that many of these rooms served little obvious purpose. The house was a medium size, which was large considering it was only housing my grandmother and her 12-year-old Shih Tzu. The creepiest thing about the place was all the abandoned shit everywhere. Books, clothes, rusty tools, kitchenware, children's toys, etc. Apparently her inner gypsy kicked in and decided all this leftover, worthless trash was acceptable. That or she needed a cheap place. And when the landowner said, "as is," they really meant as is. It becomes apparent that this trip to paint her house may extend a few days, so I can make her home somewhat respectable and habitable. Decided that I'll get started on the place first thing in the morning, seeing as I had arrived at about 8:30, and it was now nearly 10 p.m. So we eat dinner in the living room, and I get set up on the couch. About 30 minutes into trying to sleep, I'm ripped from my trance by the sound of footsteps down the hallway. "Grandma?" No response. I don't know what's going on, but I feel anxious, so I reach down to the floor and pull my pocket knife out of my shoe, as if that would be my lifeline. Something about this place just gives me bad vibes. While I'm fumbling around on the ground for my knife, I can hear some items being shuffled about in the impenetrable blackness down the hallway. I freeze. The fact that I can't see whatever this is causes me to get increasingly nervous, and I try to hold my breath. I know that if it starts coming towards me, I'll be able to see it coming by the bluish-gray moonlight cast across the hallway in a slanted square shape. In the silence that follows, I can hear my grandmother snoring loudly down the hallway. Nothing happens for some time. Whatever it was didn't sound particularly threatening, just unexpected. As I attempt to go back to sleep, I can hear something softly pattering about in the attic, which starts to feel less threatening over time, and I eventually drift off. The next morning I ask my grandmother if she has a rodent problem, seeing as this house was anything but modern and critters could easily get in. "No rats or raccoons," she says. "That's interesting." We hear the crackling of her gravel driveway, and somebody in an 80s Chevy square body truck stops outside the house. It's the neighbor. He starts explaining how he heard some weird stuff last night, and he wanted to make sure that I was aware of the property lines. Apparently, I upset the balance of this place by causing more than 30 mammals to be occupying the same 1,000 square yards, and now shit's getting funky. Weird. I haven't left the building since I got here. We'll keep an eye out. Apparently, the last person to live here was another old lady that died about 10 years ago. At this point, I'm not too worried about anything, so I get about my plan to start painting. This goes on without incident for about 6 hours until I start painting one of the purposeless rooms. The stepladder is facing a wall, and I'm on the top rung painting the corner in between the wall and the ceiling. I'm thinking about some sophomore and painting away when I hear something above me that makes my heart sink. It's the kind of sound that is made when somebody makes a single step or puts pressure on one foot on a creaky floorboard, a kind of slow moaning creaking noise. I have a mini panic attack, ditch the brush, and jump off the ladder with my hands up. Fucking rats. I get a little frustrated that I just shaved 3 months off of my life after exercising my heart like that over a damned animal. I'm calming down and inspecting the room for anomalies until I see that there is a trapdoor leading to the attic from this room. Okay. "Grandma, could you come in here?" Proceed to ask her about the attic and if she has started to store things in here yet, as my cousins moved her in here. Really, I'm just a gigantic coward and wanted her to be there while I checked it out. What a surprise, more leftover shit up here. Also other leftover shit in the form of animal feces, confirming my suspicions. She's bringing in boxes for me to lug up here when I find something very strange. A ring of dead rose petals, some symbols written on the plywood surrounding some dust ash, and a plain wooden figurine. For some reason, this featureless literal stick figure gave me a strong feeling of dread. What the fuck? I started to get this paranoid feeling that I didn't belong there, and that I needed to get the fuck out of there. Immediately start telling my grandmother what I found, standing 12 feet above her, and speaking through the square hole in the ceiling. Her eyes double in size, and she turns white. She starts shouting at me to grab the doll with her handkerchief and bring it downstairs immediately. I got to grab the doll, but the feeling of dread intensifies tenfold. I experience this surreal feeling of torment, in which time slows, and I fearfully gaze at the doll before grabbing it. This whole event lasted 5 seconds, but it felt like a minute. I bring the figurine down and head towards the living room. The front door is open, and my grandma has clearly entered psycho mode. In the middle of the driveway, she's already made a small pile of firewood and lit it with some matches and some kerosene. She shrieks at me to hurry up and throw it in the blaze. We sat there watching it burn, and I felt a huge catharsis. Like all my worries were alleviated, and the threat was gone. As we watched it burn, I looked at the details of the figure. It had no facial features, and the thing was clearly handmade. You could see the chisel marks. About 5 minutes into just standing there watching this thing burn, we hear a loud bang. The front door had slammed shut and bounced open again, about 30 degrees ajar and creeping further. She invites me to come inside and pray with her. I don't fight her on this one. We come in and pray, and she does some sloppy but very serious blessings around the house. Decide to call it an early day, and we play cards, talk, eat dinner, and go to bed. Seriously jolted by what I saw up there, but I'm able to keep cool. The night was the same as last night in the sense that, right when I was about to get some sleep, I awoke to some quiet noises in the darkness. This time my heart is about to jump out of my chest, as I realize this is most likely not a fucking raccoon. I'm staring down the hallway again, looking past my feet, waiting for something to step out into the moonlight and reveal itself. I can fucking feel it creeping back there. As I start to breathe normally again, I can see something in the light. The most horrifying thing I have ever seen begins a kind of hurried walk towards me. The creature is 5 feet tall and humanoid, with long black hair. I cannot distinguish any features. Its skin is as black as the void, aside from white glowing eyes. Before I can move, it reaches me, staring me dead in the eyes inches from my face. I scream in terror. I honestly thought I might have just died of fright because I saw nothing. I realized that I was dreaming and that the hallway is completely black. It was a cloudy night. A hallway light is flicked on, and my grandmother comes in to check on me. I'm speechless, but I can sense that she knows what happened. I decide to sleep on the floor in my grandmother's room that night like a child. But honestly, I have never been more frightened by something I can't see in my entire life.
Hello/X/never posted here before, but have a story that I've needed to get off of my chest. This is the only story I have. For context, I lived in an apartment in Iowa. In 2015, my little sister had her birthday. It wasn't very big, mostly family and friends. Her grandmother came from Tennessee as well, but she brought with her a box of presents for Christmas and her birthday. That box had a lot of nice clothes and toys, but one thing seemed out of place in a corner of the box. An old doll. It looked kind of dirty, but the eyes were creepy. When me and my mother saw the doll, we didn't really think much of it, but my mother asked her where she got it to be nice, and she said at a thrift shop down in Alabama. The day goes by, it ended on a good note. We put away the presents in the hallway. Nothing happens for about a month. Then one night as I'm doing my midnight snack run, I hear my mother call my name. So, as anyone would do, I stop and turn to my mother's room only to see my little sister's dark appearance. She waves at me and I ask her what Mom wants. She then says in my mother's voice, "Come play with me," and runs into my mom's walk-in closet. Me thinking I heard what was said was a tad weird, I dropped my shit on the table and went into my mom's room to check on her. What I saw spooked the shit out of me. My sister and Mom were sleeping as they normally do, and the closet door was shut, so I noped straight to my room and hid under my covers. That night passed and I didn't tell my mom or sister about it. So a couple of days pass and I'm at school and I get a call from my mom and she says, "Get the hell out of the closet and go to school." I'm like, "What the hell are you talking about?" "I'm at school." I sent her a pic of my school's bathroom to prove it. She then calls me back to say that someone's in the closet then. I told her to get the hell out of there, but she says she's got a knife from the kitchen and is heading to the closet. She opens the closet and nothing's there. She decides to leave and pick me up from school. I then told her about what happened a couple of days ago. She said the voice in the closet said it wanted to play. We both thought to ourselves how this is happening, so we thought. And I came up with the idea of looking at the doll. So when we got home, we found the doll in the same place it had been. I gave it a look and found some stitching that wasn't consistent with the doll, so we opened it up and found some long hair knotted up in some foul-smelling paper and something that was taped up thickly. We both knew what to do. We threw that fucking thing in the dumpster and never had shit like that ever happen again.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.